We really like working with clients who want to meet their purpose, grow their purpose in anything where marketing can add to people's quality of life, or as we say, marketing for good.
So before we begin, it's important to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather from today. And today I'm in Berry, New South Wales, which is the Dharawal Nation. We recognise that the land which we are on has been stewarded for generations by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who have a deep connection to the land, to the water, and all living beings. And as we discuss ESG principles and their implications, we acknowledge the profound intersectionality with the Aboriginal people and their inherent relationship with environmental stewardship. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend our respects to any First Nations people on today's call. So I'm Lisa Tracy, your host, along with Carolyn, and I'm currently leading the ESG division at Moir Group, a specialist finance, accounting and ESG recruitment company. We cover temporary and permanent roles from assistant accountant to CFO level, and we also recruit sustainability and ESG manager roles up to chief sustainability officer roles across all industry sectors.
Thanks, Lisa, and we're delighted to be here and partnering with Moir today to host today's webinar. I'm Carolyn Loton. I'm the Director of Content and Marketing Agency Juntos Marketing, and also Director of specialist market research agency Leapfrog Research. In the ESG area, Juntos Marketing works with organisations that offer ESG support services by developing ESG-specific content, campaigns and strategies that drive effective communications.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. And I'd like to now welcome our panel. So Timothy O'Brien is an expert in ESG, sustainability and purpose-driven business. He's the founder of Purpose Made, a consulting firm helping companies like Adidas and Aesop achieve their environmental and social goals. Tim provides services to a wide range of organisations who need help with ESG, sustainability or purpose-driven strategies.
And welcome also to Cecile Walton, who was most recently a director at Minter Ellison and previous to that, executive manager of sustainability at the Commonwealth Bank. Cecile supports organisations in navigating sustainability and ESG challenges, including greenwashing and modern slavery. And Cecile's also involved with Street Work, which is a Sydney-based not-for-profit assisting vulnerable youth. Welcome, Cecile.
And David Watkins. David is the Chief Financial Officer at JCDecaux, Australia and New Zealand, leading a finance and ESG team of 30. He's been with JCDecaux for 4 years, previously serving as the GM of Finance and also the company secretary. Prior to JCDecaux, he worked at EY in several countries. He's a chartered accountant and a member of the Institute of Company Directors and the Governance Institute of Australia. Welcome, David. And unfortunately, Alice Quepper had to withdraw from our panel. She was accepted into the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership, and we couldn't let her miss that. So in her place, however, we're delighted to welcome Elise Courtier.
Elise is formerly Chief Risk and Sustainability Officer at Sims Limited, and she spearheaded the integration of sustainability initiatives, formalising sustainability practices, establishing clear strategies and processes, guiding the organisation towards embracing the circular economy, and ultimately driving Sims towards its purpose-led objectives. And prior to Sims, Elise worked with Deloitte in enterprise risk and internal audit advisory, including a leadership stint in India. Welcome, Elise.
Excellent. Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to our panel today. So Chloe is now going to launch a poll for you to respond to, and we'd like to hear from you. What is your top ESG challenge for 2024? We've got mandatory external reporting, C-suite buy-in, internal data reporting, or bringing the team along. Okay, so we did run this poll on LinkedIn and the results were interesting but not surprising, and Carolyn will go over those with us once we've got some results in. And also just wanted to note, as you're answering the poll, please do feel free to put any questions that you have throughout today's webinar in the Q&A section and your comments in the chat throughout the session. We will get to your questions at the end of the session, but any that we do miss, I'll ensure to follow up with you via email after the event.
Thanks, Lisa. And we've got those results in that you might be able to see now. So on the call today, 34% of you thought mandatory external reporting was going to be your top challenge for this year. 13% C-suite buy-in, 33% internal data reporting, and 20% bringing the team along. That's similar, but not exactly the same as what we saw on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, 43% of respondents elected mandatory external reporting as their number one challenge. 29% said C-suite buy-in, 29% said internal data reporting, and we actually had nobody on LinkedIn as identifying bringing the team along. So that's an interesting difference.
Yeah, and I just wanted to flag, I've just seen in the chat that somebody said the chat is disabled. So I just wanted to flag that with Chloe. I'm not sure how they managed to get a comment in there if it is disabled or if it came directly to me, but just to flag that with Chloe. Okay. All right, so those results kind of do tell a story. Our, events that we ran last year were very much focused on this incoming reporting that is taking us all by storm at the moment. And this is why we wanted to do a sort of future looking session today, just to see, yes, this is going to be all consuming now, but what is ahead? What can we look at in the future? So we thought we'd start by setting the scene. Where are we today with ESG, and why is it so forefront of mind currently? Cecile, maybe we start with you, please.
Sure, and it's good to be with you all this afternoon. For full disclosure, when there is a will, there is a way, because my computer has decided to give up, but my phone is there. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's not dissimilar to the ESG space. When there is a will, there is a way. And I was very tempted to respond to the poll, but it said that panelists could not respond. Otherwise, I would have said all of the above. And by way of context, ESG, you would be forgiven to think that is a new area of business, given the amount of press coverage you would have seen in the last couple of years. But as a matter of fact, ESG as an area of focus is not a new development whatsoever. Lots of people have been working in the area of climate change, human rights, modern slavery, reporting on all of the above for a number of years. What's new is the realization, the common realization that it does matter. What's new is the fact that investors and shareholders are now moving the flow of capital towards ESG. What's new is the flurry of regulation and legislation that organizations have got to contend with. So it's really the context that has changed, as well as the very visible impacts of a number of ESG matters, such as climate change. So all of that is definitely very new. So ESG is most certainly coming of age, and that's an understatement. And what's interesting to me, who has been working in that space for 15 years plus, is the fact that now you've got more and more people realizing that ESG is part of their day job, irrespective of what the day job is, whether it's in finance, in strategy, in marketing, in communication, or the like. So by way of context, that's what I wanted to say.
No, that's great. Thank you, Cecile. And we are seeing that more and more, the integration across the organisation, and talking to CFOs who are really asking the questions of how to best tackle this, and integration across the organisation is key. So looking at this, that's the idea of creating long-term value. Given that the session today is about the futuristic view, where can we create value? How are leading companies using ESG to do this? Elise, we've had a good conversation about this. You've taken a very pragmatic approach in your C-suite position when applying, innovation to problem solving. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey at Sims and what happened?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I'm also very glad to be here and share my thoughts today. I think as Cecile just mentioned, right, ESG does matter. So every business today is deeply intertwined with ESG concerns. And it does make sense that a strong ESG proposition can create and preserve value. And Lisa, to your point, when I look at the business I came from, Sims really created value from extracting metals from waste streams, really, and providing different types of recycled metals to meet the various needs of customers. And that with a very strong ESG proposition, right? Because when you look at the steel industry, for example, every ton of recycled steel used in producing new steel avoids 1.5 tons of CO2 emissions, avoids the extraction of 1.4 tons of iron ore. When we look at the impact it has in aluminium production, for example, it does reduce the need for energy up to 95%. So a very strong ESG proposition. And we could, as an organization, remain there and just try to improve our products and extract more from the waste stream. But what we also did is really trying to create more value by looking at our own processes and what we're doing. While we extract waste from or metals from our waste stream that are coming in, there's still waste remaining after the extraction process. And so we really looked at it in terms of what can we do with that? How can we divert that from landfill being a really enormous cost for us as an organization, and innovatively find ways to use that waste to create new products that can be commercialized. And we did find and develop technology that does take that waste from our business and also will be able to take waste from other businesses that are really hard to recycle and create new products to inject in the economy. So that's a way to continue to create value for our stakeholders and our shareholders. But when you think about ESG also, it's a way to create resilience in our organization. When you think about every country, or many countries are now looking at going to lower carbon economies. What does it mean for us as an organization, right? We need to look at our assets. Are they going to be stranded down the road because of really having a lower carbon footprint being required? Are we today building processes that are helping us make decisions on capital investments that will save costs eventually in the organization by taking into consideration the price of carbon? So I know that many of you probably on the webcast do that, incorporating a shadow carbon price into your decision making. And if you don't, it's really something that I would recommend because it does drive decision for the long term and really contribute to that value preservation and value creation of an organization. So here are just a few things that I think companies can do to create value and preserve value.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I know that Sims have achieved some great accolades around the world, recognising, those achievements that you mentioned, which is evident. And I think, Tim, you've got some examples also of where you're seeing investment in ESG benefiting businesses, both in Australia and the rest of the world. Those examples of companies going beyond compliance. Can you talk to us more about that?
Yeah. I think this is a really good point. It builds off what Elise was saying, that obviously there's a whole wave of compliance coming at the moment, and organizations are gathering their resources to sort of meet that compliance and get a real uplift in things like data management and a whole range of aspects across ESG. But where we work tends to be beyond compliance. So how do you, like Elise was saying, how do you proactively manage that risk that's coming to your business? How do you manage cost, and how do you create value from what you're doing? So we see things like the environment, like Elise was saying, as a way to actually reduce the business model costs and running costs of your organization. The social piece of ESG can really be about addressing risk. So you might be able to, if you address risks and solve social issues through your business model, you might be able to open up new markets and new products. And obviously the governance component is really about tightening up those areas around ESG that could potentially come and be quite disruptive forces for your business. And climate change is a pretty obvious one. And having worked in the financial services industry, obviously it's having a huge impact on insurance at the moment. So I'll give you one example, which I think is a really good way of creating value. And I think we're a B Corp, which is a certification for social and environmental performance. And essentially, we were at the B Corp retreat last week, and there's a whole range of B Corps. And I think they're really great examples of businesses who embed ESG issues into their model and also differentiate around that piece. And one of the US-based B Corps called Method, I think, is a really great example of building it into their business model and using it as value creation. So Method is a US-based cleaning products. They're an ethical cleaning product. And they made a decision, I think it was about 6 years ago, when they were looking at a new manufacturing plant. They decided to build it in a low social economic area where there was high unemployment. So that enabled them to address some social issues in the US, but also enable them to get a really great pool of highly motivated employees. And they built a 5-star building. And obviously it had, on that 5-star building, it had renewable energy as well. And so they projected out over a 5 to 10 year horizon that it actually, that investment up front would actually reduce the cost of energy for them over that 10-year period and actually make their products cheaper than the big companies that they were competing against. So they use ESG as actually a price lever, creating real change.
Didn't realize you were going to stop there. Thanks, Tim. Nice and succinct. No, that's excellent. And I mean, it's interesting to hear your example was from America, because I think there's a company called Pleasant State, they're called, and I've been investing in them. And, you know, again, an Australian company looking at sustainable cleaning products, and then you have an opportunity to invest. And that's my small way of sort of contributing to helping these companies to grow. So it's really good to hear that, you know, there's different business models out there. And I love that social impact element to it as well. So now, going again, the same theme of innovation. Cecile, can we come back to you and maybe hear from you on what you think the role of innovation is going to play? Are there any other innovations that you're aware of that go beyond compliance, where people are being able to? Because I know you've got the lens, very much the lens of risk as well. So how can you have these big, audacious, you know, ESG goals without opening yourself up to the risk of greenwashing?
Yeah. So a couple of things to unpick in that question, Lisa, if you don't mind. So I'll start with the end. So greenwashing is clearly something that has been talked about a fair bit in the last 18 months, aided by the fact that the regulator, APRA, ASIC, and the like, have been elevating the importance of the topic. There is no such thing as a greenwashing new law. Greenwashing is pure and simple about misleading and deceptive disclosure and practices. So essentially, the realization, courtesy of what I was saying earlier, that ESG matters, has not been lost on many an organization who, from a sales and marketing standpoint, have realized that maybe that was a good way to position their brand and their marketing efforts by and sell more products or services. Nothing wrong with doing that, by the way, as long as what you do internally to deliver to your intent and your ambition follows that intent and ambition. So you cannot say right now that transitioning to a low carbon economy is part of your DNA and is embraced by every single employee of your organization if nothing is done internally. So that's the baseline. That is the floor. And to your point, Tim, this is where the compliance element comes into play. But there's also a ceiling and a way of breaking through the ceiling as well. So the baseline is just a ticket to play, really. And there is no two ways about it. Organizations have got to ensure that their stated intent is matched by their programs and practices internally. Otherwise, they'll find themselves potentially in a whole lot of trouble with court cases, regulation, legislations, and the like, not to mention civil society. So, but what I would say as well is that while there's been a lot of development around legislation, regulation, and reporting requirements, all of those are end products. So the reporting for reporting's sake is not going to deliver innovation for your practices. And it's more about thinking of how do you change fundamentally the way you operate your business, the way you do business, so as to play a role in society and help solve of the very broad ESG matters we've all got to deal with, so climate change, otherwise. So the innovation is more starting from a place of mindset than it is starting from a place of product and services. And no doubt we'll see many a new product or new service that will feel innovative, but my challenge to everyone on the call would be, yes, but is that in isolation, or is that really a demonstration of what the organization stands for in the first instance from a practices standpoint? So I don't answer your question in as a sort of pointier manner as you might have wanted me to, but the importance here is that of the mindset and that of the practices of the organization. So I have to rethink the way of doing business. And for example, one thing that comes to mind is you can ask yourself whether an insurance organization is there to provide services to individuals to cover their household content, their car in case of an accident, or any other number of products. Or you can ask yourself whether an insurance organization is there to reduce the risk in society. It's a very different proposition.
And it's really interesting you finish on insurance companies. This isn't sponsored, of course, when I say this, but I met last week with AXA Climate School in Melbourne, and they've taken it on themselves to, provide a whole suite. They've been developing it for 5 years now on, ESG training for organisations at scale. It's really interesting. And then there's also on the mindset piece, the regeneration training around, and it's not even really training, it's shifting the mindset around how companies can get ready to go beyond reducing negative impact. So there's a lot out there, and it's just a case of really embracing that and seeing how it applies to your organization, I think, or you as an individual within your organization. Thank you for that, Cecile. That's really, really great. Tim, if I can ask you maybe for some more examples of organisations that you've seen benefiting from, this approach. Have you seen anything at the pointier end?
Yeah, I think it is a challenge, right? That you've got to meet these compliance elements, and a lot of reporting, a lot of resources go into it. And I think what Cecile was saying is really important. It's around the mindset, and mindset shift is really critical from both C-suite. So opening that mindset up so that you're thinking about it from both risk and value creation, and something broadening what the real purpose and meaning of your business actually is in society. That's something that you kind of broaden it, you realize, like that insurance example, that suddenly, hey, I'm not just about, fixing someone's house or a policy holder. It's actually about, creating risk and managing risk in society. So you take on a different role. So I think one is mindset that's really critical. And one of the organizations that we worked with, which I won't mention because some of the stuff is sensitive, but it's in the US, and in the US, they're a big insurance company who work in multiple different states, and they have a real focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, something that they do really well internally. And this goes to Cecile's point as well, that you want to be doing something that's very authentic and aligned to what your ESG or your purpose is. And we worked with them to help them think through how they might take that competitive advantage or capability and use that externally. So how might they broaden their customer base so it had more diversity? How might they offer new ways of risk profiling, particularly for disadvantaged communities? What might be insurance models that allow people who are sort of drifting into that poverty sector or that poverty kind of sphere to really uplift them into something more thriving? And what might insurance play a role? So by defining that and using a whole range of their different investments and building that into their business, it's going to really offer them a significant billion-dollar opportunity, multi-billion-dollar opportunity for them to expand their business, but also have enormous impact in what they're doing. So I think they're a really good example of the work that's sort of being created in that value, and thinking as ESG as a way to really differentiate what they're doing and build the business and manage the risks that it has across their organisation.
Yeah, it's making best use of what you've got, isn't it? Thanks, Tim, for that. David, can you talk to the need about having credibility, the benefits, need to be tangible. How have you seen this from your seat at JC&Co?
Yeah, so I think ESG, it sits with the C-suite. So it's really important that what you say you're doing is what you're actually doing in practice. And I think that comes to credibility. So I think I would have said a few years ago, the business case for ESG was just really subjective. It was lots of companies wanting to say they played in the space, wanting to say they're doing things. Competitor A does something, so competitor B feels they need to do something a little bit more than that. And there's a definite shift in that now you need to be credible in what you go to market with. And I think that sits with the C-suite. So the C-suite need to encourage that innovation, make sure that ESG is embedded into all different parts of the business. And we've just done that at JC&Co. Last year. We hired a head of ESG who's been a fantastic hire. She's been really good at coordinating all those individual activities that are happening across the business. And I would say a really good place to start is think about all the small things that you do within the business that you can bring together and build into a story that supports your how you perceive ESG, communicate it to your employees, communicate it externally, leverage it. You don't have to do big bang ESG changes in your business to get the big impacts. And it's really important. I think companies were starting to get ahead of themselves and they felt they needed to say a lot in the ESG space. And I think it's really important you don't get ahead of yourself and you just talk about what you're doing, you talk about your journey, you talk about where you're taking it. And if you do that, I don't think you can get in trouble. I don't think you can be accused of greenwashing, and I think you'll get credibility with all your stakeholders.
I mean, because at this point in time, it can be quite overwhelming. And I know when you hear a lot of these amazing case studies, that again can make you feel it's so out of reach. But like you say, it's about taking a step back, taking those small steps. And, it's a start. Yeah, go Sis.
But building on what David is saying there are a couple of points that resonate with me. So the importance of calling it as it is, and perfection is the enemy of progress, really. So you can spend a long time putting together the most amazing product of service, but by the time it hits the market, you may find that the ship has sailed. When in fact, ESG is very much about showing that the answer doesn't belong to the one individual, the one team, the one organization. It will take a coalition of the willing, really, to come together and sort out or try to solve or begin to solve some of these very challenging issues of our time, like climate change, modern slavery, and the like. And it's about helping everybody see that this is the way we do it, not perfect, but this is how we are delivering some of the performance, and this is how we're going to improve on what we've done based on the lessons learned for future years. And doing that not only allows you to be authentic and transparent to the market, which is very important given the current context, it also allows you to engage your workforce and your stakeholders by showing that while you are not claiming that you've got all the answers, you're most certainly trying and you are adjusting your practices in line with the needs of the time and what you've got to put on the table. So I think that's very important.
I think that's so interesting to hear, Cecile. And one of the words that comes to mind while you're talking is leadership. And I suppose that ties in with the C-suite, which we're about to talk about in a minute. But the other thing that's come to mind from some of the things that you and others have said is how in different organisations, ESG and sustainability has a different reporting line. And I think maybe companies are still working that out, and perhaps we all need to embrace a different way of thinking because everybody needs to have responsibility. And we might come back to that later if we have time. But really interesting also to consider the C-suite and the role of the C-suite. And David, I know you've mentioned a little bit about how JC&Co have started their path, but not every C-suite or board is 100% on board with sustainability and ESG. So from your experience, David, what are the keys to getting ESG considerations higher on the agenda and bringing the board and the C-suite along on where we need to get to?
Yeah. So I work for a European company. So to be honest, I have a little bit more pressure in terms of the initiatives that we have to roll out locally. And Europe's well ahead of what we're seeing in Australia and New Zealand. I think it's about championing ESG within the C-suite. So on our C-suite, there's myself and a general manager of corporate affairs who kind of champion ESG. And it's fair to say we approach it quite differently. So I'm much more around that, the risk and how do we keep ourselves aligned to the plan. And she's really about how do we actually get the maximum value out of ESG. And then the head of ESG, who works really closely with us, can then work with us to make sure that we have a really clear governance structure, but we also have a plan so that we don't just go shoot from the hip and do activities that maybe don't get the value that they deserve. So I think if there's too many things going on, it's really hard to tell that story. And your number one stakeholder in an organisation who really resonates with ESG is the employee base. And they want to be involved and they want to be working on projects that align with their values. That's a real shift we've seen in the last few years. So it's a great opportunity, but it has to be sponsored by the C-suite, because if it's not sponsored by the C-suite, it's just doing activities for the sake of doing activities.
Well, thanks for that. Tim, have you got any thoughts in terms of C-suite?
Yeah, I just build on what David was saying. I think it not only needs to be championed by the C-suite, I think it has to live and breathe authentically by the C-suite as well. If it's not part of the values and embedded in the business, it can really sort of unwind itself, because the employees really are using it as a way to find meaning in the work that they're doing, and they're attracted to organizations that do this work. And we work quite a lot in the US and in Australia, particularly with C-suite or ASX listed companies and massive multinationals. And what we find, particularly in the US, is these material issues like Black Lives Matter and some of the climate issues are things that the employee base cares so much about. And it does translate also to the customer base as well. And their concerns from a C-suite are much more material, much more obvious, because it's impacting their businesses if they don't advocate, they don't create value, or they don't be proactive and manage them. And there's been sort of different waves of the things that have happened in the US, where mass employee walkouts and some sort of investor activism in Australia as well, and also consumers sort of going off different products and services because they're not taking a stand or not managing their ESG issues properly. If you translate that to the Australian context, I think it goes a little bit to one of the other panelists were mentioning before, that Australia C-suite probably don't have that material risk sort of as evident to them. And there's a little bit of a reluctance to really embrace ESG as that value creator, as that proactive risk manager. And so they might be looking more at their counterparts and saying, what are they doing? What are they working on? What do I need to do to keep up? And I do think it scares some C-suites a little bit, because it's areas that they haven't really had to manage or have direct expertise in before. So it's a massive capability uplift that many organizations are sort of grappling with at the moment. And we've actually seen a whole wave of organizations coming to us, ASX listed recently, whose C-suite are really encouraging looking at ESG as a way to proactively manage that risk. They're saying, how can I get ahead of these compliance issues? How can I use as a way to really create value in my business? How can I manage the risk better in my organization? So what felt like maybe 12 to 18 months ago was a bit of I don't know if we need to act as quickly as we need to before. I'm finding C-suite and boards are now embracing it, in Australia in particular, and seeing it as a how do we move beyond compliance? What is the future of this? How can we really do something meaningful for both employees and broader stakeholders we work with? So I'm really encouraged by kind of the last 3 to 6 months.
That's so interesting as well. Thinking about it as well as from the employee point of view and retention. Cecile, did you want to add?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great points that both David and Tim made there from my perspective. So the C-suite being engaged and coming at it from a different standpoint, depending on their background, so whether finance or governance or HR or whatever in between, is really important, because there is no one-size-fits-all for a start. It's about how you're going to leverage your influence and your know-how and your expertise to drive change, essentially. And then what Tim is saying there, coming back to the compliance and beyond compliance, and the importance of the board as well. You mentioned in passing, Tim, the board. The board in the organization is meant to be directing the strategy, and the C-suite and the organization to execute the directive of the strategy. And there is a big role for the board to play in giving management enough for them to really feel empowered to drive change to completion. And very importantly, to my mind, there is no such thing as an ESG strategy that sits next to a business strategy. It's one and the same thing. Every single decision in any given organization should be considered through an ESG lens, as in what are the environmental impact, the social impact, have we got the right governance, the right decision-making processes to when we decide to go left or right, because essentially the strategy of any organization is about making choices. You will pursue things and you will not pursue things. And it's about making sure you've got all the facts that you need in making that decision, that strategic decision. So I would caution against the idea of having an ESG strategy that sits next to a business strategy. It really needs to be interwoven.
Thanks so much, Cecile. Really interesting. And Elise, did you want to add your perspectives in terms of the role of the C-suite?
Sure. I do agree with all the comments that have been made. And I think one that is really important is what Cecile was touching upon, not having a separate and distinct ESG strategy or sustainable strategy from your company strategy. It has to be one. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. It's like same thing with risk management, right? Risk management needs to be embedded into your organization. It's not an add-on to help you meet or check the box because the ASX listed, right, companies need to have risk management in their organization. So that for me is really absolutely key. I think it does help if a company has a really good understanding and strong purpose, because then through that purpose, it will decide what its strategy is and align with that. And it can really rally all of its stakeholders around it. And it's very clear when they're making a decision. It also is very clear as to what ambitions they are trying to go after. It's easier to set targets and to report back on those and really be, we've heard a lot of the term of authentic and credible. And I think when you have such a clear layout of what you're about and what you're planning to do, it makes it much easier than to bring your board, to bring your internal and external stakeholders along, and to also manage and focus also on what really matters to your organization. Because when you think about ESG, it means a lot of different things to different people, and it might end up, spending a lot of time and money in terms of reporting on matters that are absolutely not material or significant or important to your organization.
Thank you. That really makes so much sense to hear the role of purpose in, I suppose, in many ways, pulling things together. So I think Cecile mentioned the board, and I was actually going to ask David to comment about investor expectations. We've seen it in some instances, investor expectations have changed. Sometimes they're aligned with board level thinking, and sometimes they're not. But how are investors impacting decisions in the ESG space, David?
I think what we've seen in our sort of global business, so we're a public company in France, is that it's sort of oscillated up and down. So I think that if anyone thinks that the investors are going to be the reason that ESG gets a big push, they might be surprised. I think it's going to come from employees who are obviously, as I said earlier, are well progressed in terms of the need for organisations to align their ESG strategy with their business strategy. And then I think in the middle, you've got your commercial partners and your customers, who I think are quite, it's important to them, but maybe it's not immediately changing decision-making at the moment. And we did a global study around commercial tenders that Jason & Co participated in, and 61% of them had environmental criteria last year. And that was against a comparative of 25% in 2019. So a pretty good step up, but still not, 60%, still not it's a majority, but not only just. Only 18% had social criteria in them, and that was 8% a few years ago. And very few had the G, so very few. Governance is kind of taken as you kind of have to do the G because you have to be a good corporate citizen. We think that's going to shift over time, and I think where we hope it goes is the procurement processes of companies and specifically government procurement. I think that's going to drive companies to do better in this space. Otherwise, a lot of projects will get scoped and talked about, but they may not get actually implemented in reality. There needs to be something that's really holding companies commercially to account to deliver ESG, and then I think that'll be the step change. That'll bring all the companies that are kind of on the fence. It'll force them to step forward.
That's so interesting, Tim. In some of the work you've done, either in Australia or in the States, have you seen a similar picture where it's not so much coming from C-suite and board or investors, and more coming from employees?
Yeah, I think it's primarily driven from employees. I think that retention and attracting the right talent. I think there's a real passion for employees who are working on these sort of environmental and social issues through their work, because they see these issues that are affecting them in their own sort of lives with their children or family members, or they're seeing things happen in the world and they want to kind of align their work with sort of solving problems. I think on the whole, I think investors are, mainstream investors are still, looking for fundamentally for return. And I think in David's industry, I think that's always tricky because you're always driven by price as sort of the main kind of criteria. But it is sort of growing, as you mentioned, around the E and the S. But what we're finding is, I spoke at last year. I spoke at investor relations conference. It was really interesting to hear a number of investors. They're not necessarily the mainstream investors, but there's some with significant funds, and how they're putting pressure on their investment portfolio book to really uplift in things like the environmental reporting and social issues. Gender pay gap was mentioned here before. They're really activating. Activating their network of investors to really uplift their capability and help them do that, or they're putting pressure on them and they're sort of dropping off. So while I'd say that mainstream investors are still a little reluctant to putting pressure on or looking mostly for returns, I think there's a growing percentage of proportion of the investment communities where, because of investees coming in their portfolio, they're knowing that they have to start putting pressure to clean up their portfolios to make them actually ESG focused. So I'd say that investors will come, and there's some really interesting work in that space. But on the whole, I think it's employees and some of the other kind of stakeholders that are driving the change at the moment.
Thanks, Tim. It's interesting to hear that. We just wanted to also round back to talk a little about challenges and pitfalls. We've talked a bit about, I think, greenwashing or greenhushing has been mentioned in the chat. Cecile, what have you got any comments in terms of common challenges and pitfalls that you're seeing?
Yeah, a couple that come to mind is there's no such thing as an ESG expert that is going to solve all the issues an organization may have. Not going to happen. Simple as that. If you work on the premise that ESG should be very much part of the business strategy. Business strategy is a very broad topic that covers a whole raft of matters. So really, you can't be an expert in everything and anything. You can have enough knowledge to know who to bring on board for something specific. So if you are at the board level and at executive level, having that breadth of knowledge to really start making sure you've got the right parties in place is very important. But being an expert from an ESG standpoint, I don't think that's real. And then what I would say as well, not in line with that as well, the human mind is such that you would ideally we would all want to put ESG in a little box sort it out, and then get on with our day. But all these issues that pertain to ESG are very much interconnected. And there is a report from the World Economic Forum that gets published every January at Davos. And last year's edition really resonated with me because it talked to the concept of polycrisis, whereby climate change is linked to the cost of living crisis, linked to the refugee crisis, to political unrest, and so on and so forth. Right? So while focusing on one particular issue might give you a feel-good moment if you see progress, it doesn't mean you're going to solve all the challenges that ESG gets your mind to think about. So I would say beware of the expert, no such thing, and just embrace the complexity of the challenges, and do not get disheartened if you realize that actually your contribution might not solve the full spectrum of challenges.
The polycrisis, I love it. Tim, have you got something that you'd like to contribute here?
Yeah, just building off that polycrisis component, I think and someone mentioned in the chat, the Q&A, about that challenge around short-term versus long-term investor expectations. And the reality is, if you look at ESG and the social issues, the environmental issues that are increasing, the inequity, the climate change, biodiversity loss, it's significant challenges, and they're all going to have this massive disruptive impact on business models. So if you're not dealing with them now, in 5-10 years' time, things like supply chains are going to be trickier. Rising cost of living is already here. So there's a whole range of issues that would be materially impacting the viability of your business as a C-suite, as a leader. So this is all about business model renewal in the face of these challenges that are coming. And I think if you've got that kind of immediate short-term mindset, you've got to realize that ESG is actually about the viability of your business longer term and making it affordable, achievable, and accessible to as many people as possible, whatever you're doing.
That's a great point. We also talked a little bit, apologies, I can't remember who mentioned it, but someone brought up data. And we were really interested, I suppose, to touch on the role of data and how data might help, particularly in addressing the pitfalls and possibly greenwashing. Elise, would you like to jump in now and talk a little about the role of data?
Sure. I think I've disappeared from the screen, but hopefully you can hear me. Not sure what's going on here. But anyway, I do believe data will be absolutely key, right? Especially in light with the amount of new disclosures that are being put or placed onto organization. And so the ability to collect, analyze, report, and assure the accuracy of the ESG or social or climate data will be absolutely needed and required. Now, I think it's a real big challenge for organization today because the data is quite often difficult to access, as some of the participants in the webcast has mentioned, right? ESG and sustainability doesn't reside with one person; it's across the organization, and very often that information resides in disparate systems when it's not also residing just on spreadsheet. I think E&Y actually just did a survey not too long ago that said that 55% of the finance executives said that their ESG data resided in spreadsheet, and only 8% had a relative complete set of procedures in place to drive a consistent application of ESG data across the organization. And that is quite interesting, and that will be the challenge for organization, because we need to get ESG reporting to the same level of same level that we have in terms of stringent of the quality and the accuracy and clarity of the assumptions we're making when we report ESG data that we do with our financials. So I think that is going to be a real challenge for organization, and I think that was also mentioned in the initial poll that was conducted here at the beginning of this webcast. Now, having said that, if I may, just for another minute, I think it's a great opportunity also for ESG folks to take the lead in this and lead conversation around that, because they're great folks to network in the organization and pull together that information. But it's also a great opportunity to rethink existing systems, to enhance existing systems, but also to challenge the way companies are doing things. So, for example, if you don't have a system today that gathers information around your consumption or your utility bills, maybe think about implementing a utility bill management system, which could not only capture that ESG data you need from a climate reporting standpoint or a water consumption standpoint, but also help drive cost savings, maybe processing your utility bills differently. So I think it's a great opportunity for ESG professionals to get involved in enhancing the quality of the information that is required to report on it. But definitely a lot of improvement is required today in order to avoid greenwashing and be able to prove and support what is being said.
Thanks so much, Elise. Lisa.
Yeah, I think we may, given it's 1:20, a lot of what we were going to sort of talk about next in terms of case studies with Elise and David have been covered. So as we've sort of been talking, so I think we'll just jump into questions. So we've got a couple of questions that have come through the Q&A and then some others that we can pick up through the webinar chat. Paula Kensington says she's keen to hear the panelists' thoughts on where Australian companies should place themselves in terms of adhering to the Australian sustainability standards. Seems climate-focused only versus the ISSB, which speaks to all areas, climate, social and governance. Any thoughts on that?
I can take that one, Lisa, if you
yeah,
want.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I think it's really disappointing that the local standard is only focused on climate, or that's at least where we are at the moment. We at JC & Co, one of the things we're really focused on is communicating what we're doing in the ESG space. So we, as a European company, will have to report information into our parent company for them to be able to comply with the international standards. And we see that as an opportunity. So that allows us to capture information that maybe, if we weren't pressured to do or didn't have to do, we might not capture. And we're going to use that, and we're going to produce a local document that allows us to communicate to staff, commercial partners, customers, to show all the good things that we're doing using really credible metrics that will have been audited. And so we think that's an opportunity for us to kind of stand out in that space. So I think Australian companies maybe don't need to go as far as our European counterparts, but there's a real opportunity to pull some of that work into what we do locally, and get the value out of it.
No, that's a really good idea, and that's great advice, I think, for organisations who are tackling this. Any other comments from anyone? Go for it, Cecile.
You on this one, and could not agree more there, David. And to my mind, it boils down to what you must do, what you could do, what you should do. So organizations that are waiting for things to really be a force requirement might do that at their peril, really, because waiting for legislation to be in place to start doing something that is coming, because it's on the horizon, it's definitely a wave that it's on its way, might rob you from having a few dry runs, essentially. So it's never wasted effort to see how you would go about approaching a broader set of disclosure by looking at your practices, looking at your systems, at your processes, at who in the organization might be able to support what will be required at some point in the not too distant future. Because it is coming. It's just a question of when exactly, as opposed to is there an if there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Cecile. Use this as an opportunity for a dry run, a couple of dry runs, just to get that. Get prepared for when it does come. Any other comments from anyone? If not, Carolyn, jump in with the next question.
So we've got a question here from Jeremy Lovell Davis. Any guidance for SMEs who are not captured by Australian reporting today, but where their customers already are? Where to start to be prepared for both messaging and data capture to support messaging? And Tim, I don't know, I thought you might like to kick us off in answering this one.
Yeah, I work at quite. I mean, obviously we work with big businesses, but we do work a lot with SMEs. So obviously there's a whole range of, and there is some compliance coming at some stage. But what I'd say, and this relates to the question, the conversation on the last question as well, is that there's a whole range of standards out there, and they are really important. But I think it really gets back to what your business is and where are you having positive and negative impacts, and being really aware of what that looks like. And if you're a small business, mapping that out and working out what you call materiality, what's most material to you, that's where you want to be measuring and being clear around what you're doing, both positive and negatively, and how you're managing that. And if you do use standards, so something like a B Corp can be really helpful for a small business because it covers a whole range of different pieces. So going through an assessment can be really helpful getting a benchmark. But obviously you can use other things like the standards we're talking about before, but just mapping to some of the other measures and metrics that are out there and choosing which ones that are relevant to you and making sure that you're collecting the basic data and information you've got and being really authentic in both the work that you're doing, the stories you're telling, and the disclosures that you're making. But I'd say start small, be really pragmatic, build in from a materiality perspective what's important to business, and make sure you're collecting the data and disclosing and managing those aspects and communicating them, both the things you're doing well and the things that you're trying to manage.
Amazing list to help get us going. Thank you. That's terrific. Has anybody else got any tips for smaller organisations?
Yeah, if I may. I'm sorry, I'm still not visible. I think being pragmatic and starting small is very important. And to the comments made is really understanding what is important to your business. So don't be swayed by what others want you to do. Really understand what you're about and what you're trying to accomplish, and what it is that your business is in and what matters to it. And then look at just a few key initiatives to drive progress in those areas and report on them. I think the reporting piece has to be quite important too, to demonstrate the value that you're driving through those initiatives. Now, also keep in mind that the initiatives that are going to be selected have to be endorsed by your CEO and your executive suite. Otherwise, you're going to develop something in parallel to what your business mission and vision is, and it's never going to work and it's not going to be sustainable. So I would start with what matters to you and to your customers more, and to your employees. Develop a few, key initiatives, show how that can be impactful and drive value, and then report on them.
Thanks, Elise. Great to hear that.
That's great. I was just going to, we're running close to time, but there was a question around greenhushing and thoughts on why, and the thoughts on companies downplaying or hiding their genuine environmental initiatives due to modesty, lack of awareness, for strategic reasons. Any thoughts or observations on this? They've said it's quite relevant. It's from Asim. It's quite relevant in the Middle East.
I'll tackle that one if you'd like, Lisa. So I attended a number of events last year, and one of them, Joe Longo, spoke about the concept of greenhushing and defined it as a form of greenwashing because it's a failure to engage with stakeholders. So essentially, not saying you're doing something for fear of commentary and criticism. If it's substantial, that might have some ramification on the value of your organization. Therefore, you might still be found in a case of greenwashing. So I would caution against that. And it's back to that perfection is the enemy of progress. If we work on the premise that authenticity is rewarded and transparency is not a choice, really, somebody will find what you're doing somewhere. It will necessarily be found in some shape or form, whether you put it out there or it's being leaked or it's being found. So being on the front foot is always a much better policy in my book than being at the receiving end of what happens when you try and keep your cards too close to your heart, if it should be public.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent answer. I didn't think of it like that, actually, that greenhushing is a form of greenwashing. Flips it and puts a different perspective on that. So unfortunately, we are out of time. We will, however, get back to you on any unanswered questions, because there's some really good ones in here, and I think Yeah, so we could go on for another half an hour. Might have to make these 1.5 hours, these ESG sessions. But so I just wanted to thank our panelists very much indeed. That was a really informed discussion. I think there's a lot in there, and there's even many layers that sit behind what we've discussed as well. So thanks for willingly sharing your knowledge and your experience. I'm sure our audience will agree that it's been both engaging and informative, and we will get back to you, of course, with answers to the questions that have been put in the chat. So with no further ado, Carolyn, did you want to add anything?
Thank you very much. What a terrific session, and yeah, great to be a part of it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
We really like working with clients who want to meet their purpose, grow their purpose in anything where marketing can add to people's quality of life, or as we say, marketing for good.